Okay, so today we're going to be diving into some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Wildfire preparedness and recovery.
Hmm.
We'll be looking at a bunch of sources, including reports from that awful wildfire in LA
Right.
back in January 2025.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners know,
I think so, yeah.
it became the worst natural disaster
It was.
in U.S. history.
Yeah, it was pretty devastating.
And, I think it really drove home the point that wildfires are a threat we all need to be ready for,
Yeah.
no matter where you live.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing that we're going to be looking at is how owning rural land can play a role in building resilience.
That's a good point. Yeah, it really is an issue that affects everyone.
Yeah.
Especially with climate change. I mean, it's really pushing fire seasons to be longer, more intense.
Mm-hmm. And one of the sources we looked at described it as like a snowball effect, where, the hotter it gets, the drier the landscape becomes.
Yeah.
And that just fuels the fire, so to speak.
So to speak, yeah.
And then on top of that, you've got the wind, which is so unpredictable.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So it's no wonder that these fires are getting so difficult to contain.
It's a really powerful analogy, I think, the snowball effect.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, too, because you've got urban areas that are expanding.
Right.
And more homes are being built.
Yeah.
Right on the edge of these wildland areas.
Right.
And that, of course, just increases the risk that those homes are going to be impacted by wildfires.
Right. So it's not just folks living out in the country anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wildfire preparedness needs to be on everyone's radar.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think the emphasis on the 3 key steps is so important.
Okay, well, let's break down those steps. What's the first step everyone should take?
Well, knowing your evacuation routes.
Okay.
In a wildfire situation.
Yeah.
I mean, things can change so rapidly. I mean, roads can close unexpectedly. And having those multiple ways out could literally be a lifesaver.
So it's not just about knowing how to get out of your neighborhood, but also having, alternate routes
Exactly.
planned out in case your main one's blocked.
Exactly. And that leads right into the second step.
Okay.
Packing a go bag.
Right.
Well in advance. Don't wait till there's smoke on the horizon.
Right.
Having that bag ready to go with those essential documents, medications, food, and water for a few days.
Yeah.
And other important supplies. I mean, that can make all the difference.
It's like having a mini emergency kit tailored for a wildfire situation.
Exactly.
So you're prepared to evacuate quickly and safely. What about the third step?
Staying connected and informed.
Okay.
So sign up for local alert systems.
Yeah.
Like CodeRED.
Yeah.
Or whatever system your community uses.
Okay.
These systems can provide you with, real-time updates about fire risk, evacuation orders. You really don't want to be caught off guard in that kind of situation.
I'm definitely checking if my county uses CodeRED after we finish recording this.
Good idea.
It's amazing how technology can really help keep people safe.
Oh, absolutely.
During these emergencies. But let's talk a little bit about the home itself. What can people do to make their property more resistant to wildfire?
That's where the concept of defensible space comes in.
Okay.
It's all about creating essentially a buffer zone around your home to try to slow down or even stop the spread of wildfire.
I've always noticed how homes, especially in more rural areas, often have a lot of open space around them.
Right.
And I always thought it was really peaceful,
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there's a strategic element to that as well.
Absolutely. It's not just about aesthetics. It's really about fire protection.
Okay.
And there's some very practical steps homeowners can take. For instance, you want to keep your plants and trees trimmed, spaced apart,
Okay.
to prevent fire from jumping from one to the next.
So you're kind of like breaking up the fuel that a wildfire needs to spread.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And if you're building or renovating, using those fire-resistant materials like stone or metal for siding and roofing can make a really big difference.
And I'm guessing things like clearing your gutters.
Oh, yeah.
And roofs of dry leaves and pine needles are really crucial, too.
Oh, you bet. You don't want those turning into kindling.
Right.
If embers land on your roof.
Makes sense. It seems like creating this defensible space, though, would be, a lot of work.
It can be, yeah.
Especially if you have a larger property.
Yeah.
Is there any support available for homeowners who want to tackle this?
There is. The source mentions Firewise USA.
Okay.
Which is a program that encourages communities to work together.
Oh, nice.
to reduce wildfire risk.
Okay.
So, well, neighbors can help each other out.
Yeah.
Creating defensible spaces, sharing resources, learning best practices. It's a great example of how, that collective action can make a real difference.
Yeah, I love that community involvement idea. It's about empowering people to take control, of their safety and be proactive about wildfire preparedness.
Exactly. And, this ties in nicely with something we touched on earlier, the role of rural land ownership in building resilience, having that extra space around your home in a rural setting gives you more room to implement these strategies.
So rural land isn't just about getting away from the city. It's about having the space to create a safer environment
Absolutely.
for yourself and your community.
You hit the nail on the head. Now let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about what to do when a wildfire is actively approaching.
Right.
This is where things get, really serious.
This is where that go bag and those evacuation routes become so crucial.
You got it. The most important thing is to listen to those alerts that we talked about.
Right.
And evacuate immediately when you're instructed.
Right.
Don't wait till you see flames. I mean, by then, it could be too late. Yeah. Every minute counts in these situations.
And it might seem obvious, but having that go bag packed,
right.
By the door, ready to grab.
Ready to go.
Means you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to, figure out what to take.
Absolutely. Being prepared can make all the difference between a stressful but manageable evacuation or a chaotic, potentially dangerous one.
All right, so we've covered evacuation, but what if someone finds themselves trapped, either indoors or outdoors? What should they do?
If you're trapped indoors, the key is to stay inside.
Okay.
Seal windows and doors as best as you can with, duct tape or wet towels.
Okay.
Stay in the center of the house, away from windows.
Right.
If you're caught outdoors, try to find a cleared area. Lie face down to protect your lungs from the smoke.
Okay.
And cover yourself with anything you can find, a blanket, a jacket, whatever you have.
Right.
To try to shield your skin from the heat.
It's terrifying to even think about being in that situation, but knowing these safety procedures could really be, life-saving.
I agree. We all hope it never comes to that, but being prepared for the worst-case scenario is essential.
So we've talked about what to do before and during a wildfire.
Right.
What about after? What are some key things people should remember during the recovery process?
The first thing is wait for official clearance.
Okay.
Before returning to your property.
Okay.
There could be hidden dangers, like downed power lines, weakened structures, or smoldering debris. Safety remains paramount even after the flames have subsided.
That makes sense. Even if you're just, really anxious to see what happened to your property, you don't want to rush back into a potentially dangerous situation.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember that you're not alone. There are resources out there. Reach out to FEMA, your insurance company, and local aid groups. They can provide financial assistance, temporary housing, all those kinds of things, other forms of support.
It's a reminder that even in the face of such devastation, there's support available. You don't have to go through it alone.
Right.
What about the emotional toll? Wildfires can be incredibly traumatic experiences.
Absolutely. The emotional impact of losing your home, your belongings, even your entire community can be profound. Talking to therapists, counselors, or support groups can be really incredibly helpful in processing that trauma, coping with the stress, finding ways to move forward.
It's a reminder that resilience isn't just about, physical strength.
Well,
it's about emotional strength as well. And sometimes that means reaching out for help and allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
You're absolutely right. And, this might sound counterintuitive.
Okay.
But I find it helpful to remember that nature itself is incredibly resilient.
Right.
Even after a devastating wildfire.
Yeah.
Those landscapes are often teeming with new life. Wildfires can clear out dead vegetation, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor, creating space for new growth. It's a natural cycle of destruction and renewal.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like nature is showing us that it's possible to come back stronger even after a devastating event.
Exactly. And as we rebuild both physically and emotionally, we can learn from nature's resilience.
Right.
We can rebuild smarter, stronger, and more prepared for the future.
I love that perspective. It's not just about restoring what was lost. It's about improving and adapting for the future.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the bigger picture, the future of wildfire management itself. It seems like things are changing rapidly with new technologies, policies being implemented to reduce risk.
Yeah, they are. One area that's really exciting is predictive modeling.
Okay.
Researchers are using sophisticated algorithms and data analysis to forecast fire risk.
So instead of just reacting to wildfires, we're starting to anticipate them.
Exactly.
That sounds like a game changer.
It is. And then there are drones, which are
Oh,
becoming increasingly important in wildfire management.
how so?
Well, they can survey large areas very quickly. They can detect hotspots that might escape the human eye,
Okay.
and even assist with controlled burns, which are a crucial tool for reducing fuel loads and preventing larger, more destructive fires.
I've heard about controlled burns, but can you explain what they are and why they're so important?
Sure. Controlled burns, also called prescribed burns, are intentionally set fires that are very carefully planned
Okay.
and managed by fire experts. They're used to mimic the natural role of fire in ecosystems.
Right.
They help to clear out underbrush, reduce fuel loads, and promote the growth of native plant species.
So it's kind of like you're managing wildfires by using smaller controlled fires to prevent those larger, more destructive ones.
Exactly. It's a way of working with nature, not against it. And it's becoming an increasingly important tool in our efforts to manage wildfires, especially as climate change continues to make our landscapes drier and more prone to burning.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And what about those drones? It's amazing to think about how technology is being used in wildfire management.
It really is. Drones equipped with infrared cameras can fly over large areas, detect hotspots that might not be visible from the ground. This helps firefighters to quickly identify and target areas where fires are starting or spreading.
Okay.
They can also be used to assess damage after wildfire, helping to direct resources where they're needed most.
That is incredible. It really does sound like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does.
But it's actually happening.
It is. And it's making a real difference. And on the policy side, we're seeing more emphasis on fire-resistant zoning,
Okay.
which means building codes are being updated to require the use of fire-resistant materials in new construction, especially in areas that are prone to wildfires.
That seems like a really sensible approach. Building homes that are better able to withstand wildfires, especially in those areas where the risk is higher.
Exactly. And forest management practices are evolving as well.
Okay.
We're moving away from the old approach of suppressing all wildfires,
Right.
and instead embracing a more nuanced approach that recognizes the ecological benefits of fire.
So instead of trying to prevent all fires, we're learning to manage them in a way that's beneficial for both the environment
Exactly.
and human communities.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Right.
And it's a complex challenge, but the key takeaway here is that wildfire management is a constantly evolving field, and we're learning more all the time.
It sounds like a really exciting field to be working in, especially with all this innovation happening.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's a field where, rural landowners have a particularly important role to play.
I'm intrigued. How do rural landowners fit into all of this?
Well, because they're often living on the front lines of wildfire risk, they have a really unique opportunity to implement those sustainable practices, create those defensible zones that we talked about.
So it's about being stewards of the land, not just owners of it.
Precisely. They can make choices about how they manage their land, what they plant,
Right.
how they maintain their property.
Right.
That can make a real difference when it comes to wildfire resilience.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine there's a sense of empowerment that comes with that, knowing that you're taking active steps to protect your property and your community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by working together, sharing knowledge,
Right.
embracing these new technologies and policies, rural landowners can become, really leaders in fire safety for their communities.
It's inspiring to think about how individual actions can contribute to, such a large-scale effort.
It is. And, what I find particularly fascinating is the role of nature itself in this whole cycle. While wildfires can be incredibly destructive, they're also a natural part of many ecosystems. They can actually regenerate landscapes,
Right.
clearing out dead vegetation,
Right.
allowing new growth to flourish.
That's a really important point to remember. We focus a lot on the destructive aspect of wildfires, but they can also be these forces of renewal and change.
Exactly. They've been shaping our planet for millennia, and we need to learn to coexist with them,
Right.
respecting their power, while also taking steps to mitigate the risks.
That's a great point. It's not about conquering nature. It's about learning to live with it and adapt to its rhythms.
Exactly. And as we move forward, the question isn't whether wildfires will happen.
Yeah.
It's how prepared we'll be when they do.
That's a sobering thought, but also a call to action.
Yeah.
What steps can our listeners take today to feel more prepared for wildfire season, whether they live in, a bustling city or a peaceful rural setting?
Well, the first step is to understand the specific risks in your area.
Okay.
Contact your local fire department, visit the website of the National Fire Protection Association, or check out resources from organizations like Firewise USA. They can provide information on fire history, evacuation routes, and best practices for creating defensible space.
So it's about being informed and proactive.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to wildfires.
Okay. I'm ready to take action. What else can I do?
The next step is to create a plan.
Okay.
Talk to your family or housemates about what you would do in the event of a wildfire. Decide on those evacuation routes, meeting places, and communication strategies. Make sure everyone knows what to do and where to go if an evacuation order is issued.
Having a plan definitely brings peace of mind. It's one less thing to worry about when you're facing a stressful situation.
You got it. And don't forget about that go bag.
Right.
It's a good idea to keep it stocked and ready to go year-round, just in case.
Excellent point. It's better to be prepared and not need it than to need it and not be prepared.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And, something else that can be really helpful is to connect with your community. See if there are any local groups or organizations that are involved in wildfire preparedness efforts.
That's a great idea. It's about building a network of support and working together to create a more fire-resilient community.
Exactly. And remember, wildfire preparedness isn't just about protecting your home. It's about protecting your community and the natural environment as well.
That's a powerful thought. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and we have this, shared responsibility to protect each other.
Absolutely.
In the places that we call home.
Beautifully said. And, as we continue this deep dive, we'll explore some more specific strategies for wildfire preparedness and resilience, including the unique role that rural land ownership can play.
I'm excited to learn more. This conversation has been incredibly informative, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling more empowered to take action and prepare for wildfire season.
I hope so. Remember, wildfires are a serious threat, but we can take steps to protect ourselves, our communities, and the natural world.
That's a hopeful note to end on.
And remember, it's an ongoing journey. We're all learning and adapting as we go. But by working together and embracing innovation, we can create a future where we can coexist with wildfires safely and sustainably.
Beautifully said. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure. One thing that really struck me in the research was how much the desire for resilience connects to the reasons why people are drawn to rural living in the first place.
That's a fascinating connection. I can definitely see that it's not just about escaping the city, right? There's this deeper appeal to rural life, a sense of self-sufficiency, being closer to nature, and maybe even like a desire to be more prepared for whatever life throws your way.
Exactly. And that's where rural land ownership can really come into its own. When it comes to wildfire preparedness, those wide open spaces, they aren't just aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
They give you the literal space to create those defensible zones that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You have more room to implement sustainable practices.
Right.
To manage vegetation and really take control of your safety in a way that can be a lot more challenging in densely populated urban areas.
It's like having this built-in safety buffer, this proactive approach to resilience that's just woven right into the landscape itself.
I like how you put that, a proactive approach.
Yeah.
It really gets at the heart of what makes rural land ownership so appealing. In this context, and speaking of proactive approaches, the source material highlights something really important that I think often gets overlooked.
Okay, I'm curious.
It's the emotional recovery aspect.
Right.
We've talked about the practical steps of preparing for, responding to wildfires.
Right.
But rebuilding after a wildfire, it isn't just about fixing structures.
Right.
It's about healing from that trauma, coping with the emotional toll of loss.
Yeah.
And finding ways to process those experiences.
You're absolutely right. I can't imagine the stress and the heartbreak of losing your home, your belongings, maybe even your entire community to a wildfire.
It's devastating.
It's a level of loss that most people can't even fathom.
And that's why it's so crucial to acknowledge that emotional recovery is just as important as physical rebuilding, sometimes even more so.
Yeah.
Seeking support from therapists, counselors, support groups can be absolutely crucial in processing those experiences and finding ways to move forward.
It's a reminder that resilience isn't just about physical strength. It's about emotional strength, too.
Yeah.
And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is reach out for help and allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Beautifully said. And, as we talk about resilience, there's something incredibly powerful about the way nature itself recovers after a wildfire. It's a reminder that even in the face of such immense destruction, there's always hope for renewal.
I love that perspective. It's like nature is showing us that it's possible to not just bounce back from adversity, but to actually grow and thrive in the aftermath.
Exactly. Those charred landscapes might seem desolate at first,
Right?
but they're actually teeming with new life wildfires. Clear out dead vegetation, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor, create space for new growth. And this new growth can be incredibly diverse and vibrant. It's the natural cycle of destruction and renewal.
It's almost like nature is giving us a blueprint for resilience, isn't it?
Right.
Embrace change, adapt to the new landscape, and find ways to not just survive, but to thrive in the aftermath.
You're spot on. It's a beautiful analogy, and it brings us to a really important point that we touched on earlier, the future of wildfire management.
Right. We talked about how things are changing so rapidly in terms of technology and policy. What are some of the most promising advancements that you've come across in your research?
One area that's really taking off is predictive modeling.
Okay.
Scientists are using these incredibly sophisticated algorithms and data analysis techniques to try to forecast fire risk, which allows us to be more proactive in our prevention and mitigation efforts.
So instead of just reacting to wildfires as they happen, we're starting to anticipate them.
Exactly. It's a game changer.
Ah.
It's like having a weather forecast, but for wildfires.
Wow.
Imagine being able to see where the highest risk areas are,
Right.
where fires are most likely to ignite and spread,
Oh, yeah.
and then be able to focus your resources on those areas.
That would be incredible. It's like taking a preventative approach, addressing the potential issues before they even arise. I know we talked about drones earlier.
Right.
What other technologies are being used in wildfire management?
Drones are definitely playing an increasingly important role. They're equipped with high-resolution cameras, often infrared cameras,
Okay.
which can see through smoke and detect hot spots that might not be visible from the ground.
Wow.
This allows firefighters to quickly assess the situation,
Yeah.
identify where the fire is most active, and direct their efforts more strategically.
That's amazing. It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It does.
But it's actually happening right now.
It is, and it's making a real difference on the ground. And then there are smart sensors,
Okay.
which are being deployed in forests and wildland areas to monitor things like temperature, humidity, wind speed,
Right.
and even fuel moisture levels.
Wow.
These sensors provide real-time data that can be fed into those predictive models we were talking about, making them even more accurate.
So we're essentially harnessing technology to gain like a deeper understanding of wildfire behavior and then using that knowledge to become more effective at managing those fires.
It's a fascinating intersection of science, technology, and policy.
Yeah.
And it's an area that's evolving rapidly.
What about policy changes? Are there any new regulations or initiatives that are helping to improve wildfire safety?
Absolutely, we're seeing more and more emphasis on fire-resistant zoning, which means building codes are being updated to require the use of fire-resistant materials in new construction, especially in those wildland-urban interface areas,
Right.
where homes are built close to forests or other flammable vegetation.
That makes a lot of sense if we're building homes in areas that are prone to wildfires.
Right.
Those homes need to be designed and built to withstand those conditions.
Right. It's about building smarter, not just rebuilding what was lost. And forest management practices are evolving too.
Okay.
We're moving away from the old approach of suppressing all wildfires.
Right.
And instead embracing a more nuanced approach that recognizes the ecological benefits of fire.
We talked about this a bit earlier, the concept of controlled burns.
Right.
Are there other ways that we're learning to manage forests more effectively?
There are. One approach is called thinning,
Okay.
which involves selectively removing trees and vegetation to reduce fuel loads and create more space between trees.
Okay.
This helps to slow down the spread of wildfires and make them less intense. Another strategy is prescribed grazing,
Okay.
which uses livestock like goats or sheep,
Right.
to graze on underbrush and reduce fuel loads.
So it's a multi-pronged approach combining technology, policy changes, and a deeper understanding of forest ecology.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between protecting human lives and property,
Yeah,
while also respecting the natural role of fire in our ecosystems.
that's a great point. It's about learning to coexist with wildfires,
Right.
not trying to eliminate them entirely.
Yeah.
It's about respecting their power while also taking steps to mitigate the risks.
You've summed it up perfectly. It's a complex challenge,
Yeah.
but one that's becoming increasingly important as climate change continues to exacerbate wildfire risk around the world.
It's a sobering reminder that this issue isn't going away anytime soon,
Right.
but it's also inspiring to see how communities are coming together
Yeah.
to find innovative solutions and build, a more fire-resilient future.
I agree. There's a real sense of hope and determination out there. A recognition that we're all in this together and that we need to work collaboratively to find solutions.
And it sounds like rural landowners have a particularly important role to play in this evolving landscape.
They do, because they're often living on the front lines of wildfire risk.
Right.
They have a unique opportunity to implement those sustainable practices, create those defensible zones, and really become leaders in fire safety for their communities.
So it's not just about protecting their own property. It's about being stewards of the land, making choices that benefit the entire ecosystem.
Exactly. And by working together, sharing knowledge, and embracing these new technologies and policies,
Right.
rural landowners can make a real difference. They can help to create a safer, more resilient future, not just for themselves, but for their communities and the natural world.
It's inspiring to think about how individual actions can contribute to such a large-scale effort.
It is, and it's important to remember that even small steps can make a difference. We all have a role to play
Yeah.
in building a more fire-resilient future.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the big picture. Let's zoom in a bit.
Okay.
What are some specific things our listeners can do right now to start preparing for wildfire season?
One of the most important things you can do is to create defensible space around your home.
Okay.
This means clearing away flammable vegetation, trimming trees, and creating a buffer zone between your house and any potential fuel sources.
And that applies whether you live in a rural area or a more urban setting.
Absolutely. Even if you have a small yard or live in an apartment, there are things you can do to reduce the risk of fire spreading to your home.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, if you have any trees or shrubs near your home, make sure they're well trimmed and spaced apart.
Okay.
Keep your gutters clean and free of debris.
Right.
And consider using fire-resistant landscaping materials like gravel or stone instead of mulch or wood chips.
Those are great tips. What about things we can do inside our homes?
Make sure your smoke detectors are working, that you have fire extinguishers on hand, and that you know how to use them.
Right.
It's also a good idea to have a plan for what you would do in the event of a power outage,
Okay.
as wildfires can often cause power lines to go down.
So being prepared for wildfire season is really about thinking ahead and taking a holistic approach.
It's about being aware of the risks, taking steps to mitigate those risks, and having a plan in place for what to do if a wildfire does occur.
It sounds like a lot to remember.
It can be.
But the good news is that there are, plenty of resources available
There are.
to help people get prepared.
That's right. We mentioned some earlier, but it's worth repeating. Your local fire department is a great place to start.
Okay.
They can provide information on wildfire risks in your area, evacuation procedures, and tips for creating defensible space.
Are there other organizations that people can reach out to?
Absolutely. Organizations like the National Fire Protection Association and Firewise USA have a wealth of information on wildfire preparedness. You can visit their websites or attend community workshops to learn more about how to protect yourself and your property.
It's amazing how much information and support is out there for people who want to get prepared.
It is. And, it's really encouraging to see how many people are taking wildfire preparedness seriously.
Yeah.
It's a sign that we're becoming more aware of the risks and that we're committed to finding ways to live more safely and sustainably in fire-prone areas.
I agree. There's a real sense of community and shared responsibility that emerges when people come together to face a challenge like this.
You said it, and that brings us back to that idea of resilience. It's not just about being physically prepared.
Right.
It's about having the emotional strength to face adversity and the collective will to support each other and rebuild stronger.
That's a beautiful thought. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And, As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to emphasize that wildfire preparedness is an ongoing journey.
What do you mean by that?
It's not just about checking a few boxes and then forgetting about it. It's about staying informed,
Right.
being adaptable, and continually reassessing your preparedness as conditions change.
That makes sense. Wildfires are like a dynamic force of nature.
Right.
And our approach to preparedness needs to be just as dynamic.
It's about learning, adapting, and working together to create a future where wildfires are no longer seen as these insurmountable threats,
Yeah.
but as forces of nature that we can learn to live with safely and sustainably.
I love that vision. So where do we go from here? What's next on our deep dive journey?
Well, we've laid a lot of groundwork here.
Yeah.
Talking about the risks of wildfires,
Yeah.
the importance of preparedness,
Right.
and the evolving landscape of wildfire management. Now, I think it's time to delve into some specific strategies and techniques that you can use to protect your home and your property.
I'm ready to dive in. Let's get practical. Okay, so we've explored the risks of wildfires. We've talked about how important it is to be prepared. And we even touched on how technology and policy are kind of shaping the future of wildfire management. But now I think I'm ready to get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
What are some tangible things that our listeners can do right now to safeguard their homes and properties?
You're right. Let's get practical.
Okay.
We've talked about defensible space.
Right.
But let's break it down even further. Imagine your home is at the center of a series of concentric circles.
Okay, I'm visualizing it like a target.
Exactly, like a target. The closest circle, extending about 5 feet out from your house, is what's called the immediate zone. This is where you need to be the most vigilant
Okay.
about removing anything that could easily catch fire.
So we're talking about things like dry leaves, pine needles, firewood stacks, basically anything that could act as kindling.
You got it. It's also important to make sure there are no flammable materials stored under decks or porches, and to keep your gutters and roof clear of debris.
What about plants and landscaping in this zone?
Choose fire-resistant plants, and make sure they're well-spaced and pruned. You want to eliminate any continuous fuel sources that could allow a fire to travel quickly toward your home.
So no dense shrubs right up against the house.
Exactly. Moving outward, the next circle, extending about 30 feet from your house, is what's called the intermediate zone.
Okay.
Here you want to create horizontal and vertical spacing between trees and shrubs. Think of it as breaking up the fuel continuity.
So a fire would have a harder time jumping from one tree or shrub to the next.
Exactly. And in this zone, it's also important to remove any dead trees or branches, as those can become easily ignited.
Okay, so we've tackled the immediate zone, we've tackled the intermediate zone. What about that outermost circle?
That's what's called the extended zone, which extends out to about 100 feet or even further, depending on the terrain and the vegetation in your area.
What are the key considerations in this zone?
This is where you want to focus on maintaining healthy vegetation and managing fuels to reduce fire intensity.
Right.
This might involve thinning trees, removing ladder fuels. Those are low-lying branches that can allow a fire to climb up into the tree canopy.
Right.
And creating fuel breaks,
Right.
which are these strategically placed open spaces
Right.
that can help to slow or stop the spread of wildfire.
Wow, it's amazing how much thought goes into creating defensible space. It's a real science.
It is. And it's a science that can save lives and property.
Yeah.
And one of the, I think, most exciting developments in wildfire management is the increasing use of technology to help homeowners assess their risk and create effective defensible space.
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Well, there are now online tools and apps that allow you to input information about your property, like the type of vegetation, the slope of the land, the proximity to other structures.
Right.
And the tool then analyzes that information and provides personalized recommendations for creating defensible space.
So it's like having a virtual wildfire consultant right at your fingertips.
Exactly. And some of these tools even use satellite imagery and aerial photography to provide a detailed view of your property and the surrounding landscape,
Wow.
making it even easier to identify potential hazards and plan your defensible space strategy.
That's incredible. It's amazing how technology is empowering homeowners to take control of their wildfire preparedness.
It is. And one of the most important things to remember about defensible space is that it's not a one-time project.
Right.
It requires ongoing maintenance.
So it's not just about clearing brush once and then forgetting about it.
Right. You need to be vigilant about removing dead vegetation, pruning trees and shrubs, and keeping your gutters clean. throughout the year, especially during fire season.
It's like any other aspect of home maintenance. It requires regular attention
That's a great analogy.
to keep things safe and in good shape.
And just like you might have a checklist for like spring cleaning or winterizing your home,
Right.
it's helpful to have a wildfire preparedness checklist that you review regularly.
I love that idea. A checklist would definitely keep me on track.
I think it would help a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, creating defensible space is not just about protecting your own property. It's also about protecting your community.
That's an important point. How so?
When each homeowner takes steps to create defensible space, it creates this, like, domino effect. Those individual efforts add up to create a more fire-resilient community as a whole.
So it's like a collective effort, a shared responsibility to protect not just our own homes, but our neighbors' homes as well.
Exactly. And that sense of community is something that I've seen, time and time again in areas that have been impacted by wildfires. People come together to help each other, to rebuild, and to support each other through the emotional and physical challenges of recovery.
It's inspiring to see how, even in the face of such devastation, communities can emerge stronger and more united.
It is. And that sense of community resilience is something that we can all tap into, whether we live in a rural area or an urban setting.
So what can our listeners do to get involved and build those connections within their own communities?
There are so many ways to get involved. You can start by connecting with your local fire department or emergency management agency. They often offer community workshops, training programs on wildfire preparedness.
What else can people do?
Look for local organizations that are involved in wildfire mitigation efforts, like Firewise USA groups or community forestry programs. These groups often organize volunteer work days, to clear brush, plant trees, and educate residents about wildfire safety.
Those sound like great ways to get involved and make a difference.
They are. And, one of the most rewarding aspects of getting involved in these efforts is the sense of empowerment that it brings.
Yeah.
When you take action, when you learn new skills, when you connect with others who share your concerns, you realize that you're not powerless in the face of this challenge.
Yeah.
You have the ability to make a difference.
That's a powerful message. It's about taking ownership, being proactive, and working together to create, a safer and more resilient future.
Absolutely. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to leave our listeners with a sense of hope. Yes, wildfires are a serious threat, and they're likely to become even more frequent and intense as our climate continues to change.
It can definitely feel overwhelming at times.
I understand that. But the good news is that we're not powerless. We have the knowledge, the tools, and the collective will to face this challenge by working together, by embracing innovation, and by never losing sight of that sense of hope. We can create a future where wildfires are no longer seen as these insurmountable threats, but as forces of nature that we can learn to live with safely and sustainably.
That's a beautiful vision and a really powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been an incredible journey.
It's been my pleasure. Stay safe out there, everyone.
Yeah.